Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The True Story of the Christmas Truce, British and German eyewitness accounts from World War I, by Anthony Richards. Introduction by Hugh Strawn. Narrated by Simon Vance. Introduction. It'll all be over by Christmas. Such was the widely shared hope held by many families in August 1914 at the very beginning of the First World War. Some kind of European conflict had been far from unexpected, with the increased militarization of Imperial Germany threatening the fragile balance of power between European nations. The network of political and military alliances that existed between countries, built up over many years, meant that once a conflict broke out it would irrevocably draw in multiple combatants along with their empires, ensuring that any war would become a truly global phenomenon. Yet few expected a war to last for so long. In the minds of many observers from both sides, it felt natural to expect a relatively short, sharp conflict centred in Europe in order to resolve the territorial disputes, rather than anything longer term. Few, if any, would have predicted that the war would continue for another 4 years. When Christmas arrived in 1914, barely 4 months after the outbreak of war, it proved to be an important moment for each nation to pause and process how the circumstances were affecting individual lives. As with any Christmas holiday, it was a time when everybody wanted to let off steam, to forget the difficulties they had been experiencing in everyday life, and concentrate instead upon the need for selfish indulgence. The approach of the year's end was also the traditional time for reflection on the previous 12 months, leading people to consider their priorities and hopes for the future. Yet this particular year's Christmas celebrations would be affected by one very significant factor. The major European nations were fighting a brutal war. How could people really celebrate the season of goodwill during a time of hateful, bloody conflict? Christmas would no longer be the peaceful holiday that everybody expected, since world events had overtaken any individual concerns. But it gave people from both sides an opportunity to reflect on the reasons why they were fighting, and the likelihood of the war being resolved in the immediate future. Some, including those not yet quite convinced of the likely prospect of an extended conflict, looked to Christmas as an excuse for accelerating peace. The First World War would see an unprecedented level of civilian debate, which can be observed quite clearly in the newspapers and magazines of 1914, and remains crucial for understanding how people felt about the conflict at the end of that year. The expansion of war reportage brought the fighting directly into the living rooms of those back home, where people would debate the course of the war, offer praise to military heroes of the hour, and circulate stories, often of dubious reliability, concerning enemy atrocities and their opponents' overall beastliness. Everybody had an opinion, and the all-encompassing nature of the war meant that there was an eager audience ready to listen. Thus, by the end of the year, a number of initiatives for peace had already appeared, which, although ultimately unsuccessful, meant that the idea of a Christmas armistice was certainly in people's minds as a possibility, albeit remote. One of the most important factors which made that first Christmas of the war so different from Christmases of previous wars was the great number of men serving overseas. Earlier conflicts had largely been fought by professional armies, highly regimented and trained to obey orders, trusting in their military hierarchy to make the right, winning decisions. But the need to expand the initial peacetime British Expeditionary Force, BEF, of 70,000 men to cope with the greater scale of the challenge on the Western Front meant that for the first time a significant number of soldiers serving overseas were from the territorial force, keen volunteers known as weekend soldiers, who most likely had never suspected that they might be called to carry arms against an enemy in a foreign country. Many families would therefore come together to share their Christmas dinner in 1914 with an empty place at their table for the first time. From Britain alone, by the end of the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?